अकाल चैनल ਨੂੰ ਸਬਸਕ੍ਰਾਈਬ ਕਰੋ ਨਵੀਂ ਵੀਡੀਓਜ਼ ਦੀ ਨੋਟੀਫਿਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਬੈਲ ਆਈਕਨ ਨੂੰ ਕਲਿੱਕ ਕਰਨਾ ਨਾ ਭੁੱਲਣਾ
Welcome to the very first edition of the Insight Show on the Akaal Channel. My name is Jaswant Bora, your host for a series of episodes that will look at some of the issues that affect us locally, nationally and internationally, and issues such as the Windrush generation, the Brexit that's currently going on, from terrorism to knife to gang crime. And during the course of the series we'll be discussing these with key individuals in various levels. But today we're in a very special place. We are in the House of Lords with a very special guest indeed. I'm joined by Right Honourable Lord Dholakia, OBE, who's been a member of the House since 1997, who will be discussing with myself some of the key issues that's currently in the media around knife crime and young people. Welcome to the show, Lord Dholakia.
Thank you for inviting me to take part in this particular discussions.
Thank you. Just I want to give a bit of a brief introduction around yourself, some of the stuff that you've done, and there was so much, and I just had to concise a lot of it. You were a former councillor of Brighton Borough Council, former Lib Dem president, now co-deputy. You were the vice president for the Mental Health Foundation. You were a member for the Howard League, for Penal Reform. You were a member of editorial board,
Yes.
the Howard Journal for Penal Reform, a member of Lord Carlisle's Committee on Parole System, and also part of the APPG group, which is an all-party political group, and currently the president of NACRO. I think I've got them all right.
There's a very flattering introduction.
Thank you very much. Yeah, today we were discussing a very big issue that is impacting all of us, and you're fully aware of some of these issues, and you've been involved at all different levels in that. Issues of knife crime and young people in our communities all over the media. And given the current concerns in the social media and some of the statistics around this kind of current problem that we have, for example, they were recorded in I think 2017 or 18, about 40,100 kind of offences involving some sort of knife or sharp instrumental object in England and Wales, which is quite a lot. And we see some of it its highest peak, say in places like London, for example, in terms of offences. Geographically, Birmingham, for example, there were 492 knife crimes incidents across there, 269 in Birmingham, 492 in total. In your view, and these are involving children and young people, which is quite disturbing. In your view, why do you think this is happening? And given the current epidemic, is it something that we are unable to manage as a government, as a people, as services?
I think my own view is that crime is very difficult to manage because you don't know what will happen at a given time. But the ones relating to knife crime is absolutely worrying because what is happening is predominant in particular communities, particularly the type of gang culture we see developed in this country. This wasn't part of the development of our young people in this country, but it has come about in the last 2 or 3 years. And we have one of the highest rate of knife crime murders in this particular country. That must worry all of us. Because at the end of the day, you're taking the life of a young person, but we have never quite found out what are the strategies we need to employ to be able to deal with these issues. I have 2 or 3 things in mind. For example, in Scotland, they've actually reduced the criminality related with knife crimes. Why haven't we been able to do in the United Kingdom? Scotland looks at this matter very much as a health issue. On the basis of, you look at the mental health of people, you look at the development of young people going up, what is it that's happening that we are not doing in this country? But there is also the inclusion of the trafficking in drugs that go on. People who move across county lines, moving from different parts of the country, you're using couriers to be able to take drugs. And I think that also, once you fail to pay your money to the people who are sending you out, results in the type of violence we are talking about. My suggestion is on this particular matter is that we have never diverted young people away from the crime substantially. For example, we have closed more sports halls, school playground, etc. So the type of leisure activities that young people need are fairly limited, and we need to look at very seriously what is the provision we could make and how do we create what I commonly call the civic education in this country, which actually there to help people live a decent, healthy life.
Obviously, yeah, there's points that are interesting there regarding some of the cuts and the resources that have been taken away or dismantled from budgets, especially the youth service, for example.
Yes.
I mean, there are MPs who have called this a national, called this to be discussed as a national level crisis. That we are in, and which we can see it all over the media. We've got people like, for example, other political figures. You need a Cobra-style response from the Home Secretary, Sabri Javiti, to get a grip on it, as one MP said, Jess Phillips said. So we are in a bit of a situation where it seems like they just don't know what to do. But taking in consideration, as you just mentioned, that this is a situation that's not been happening overnight. We've had our history also dictates and informs us over the years and periods of certain events in history where we had a possibility to nip things in the bud before they escalated.
There is a very fundamental question. Over the last few years, because of the type of government policy, we have reduced the police numbers in this particular country. Quite often we now find that our streets are not properly patrolled around, streets are not being able to look after themselves. And one of the things that I'm very clear about this matter is that it needs much more public involvement in what is going on. Crime is everything to do with access. What access have you got? You got access to the street violence, you go into the street violence. And we need to be very careful when the people have that particular access, that we have methods to be able to control that access. If people have more facility to use their leisure time in a nice and proper manner, you will not see the type of difficulty that you are seeing. And why is it that whereas in the rest of the world, the situation is developing in the way that there are fewer crimes committed because of knives, why is it that we have increased that in London and places like Birmingham, Manchester? My view on this one is we need to look at international practices. What is it that other countries are doing? What are the provisions they are making for our young people? What is the type of education we are forwarding to people? What are the consequences of a knife crime? Are our young people aware? Many of the people are so young, 14, 15 years old, who do not understand the seriousness of the matter in which they are involved, and perhaps could ruin their life for a very, very long time to come. And we've got to be aware of these issues to be able to take it forward.
It's interesting you should say that, because we've, as you're fully aware, had all these different reforms and reviews, and every time there's a particular incident, just like we have in terror attacks, we are going back to the drawing board and reviewing what can be done, and whether that's a law enforcement approach, whether it's prevention. But just like 2011, we had the riots, and obviously we see the damage that caused, and a lot of young people involved with that. We had something like a review that was commissioned at the time, and a report that called the Ending Gang and Youth Violence Report, which talked about earlier intervention, particularly with children and young people. We've got the serious violence strategy as well, a few years later, in response to some of these issues that are escalating. And also the governments are very keen to put sort of funding into place, given we are having resources cuts, and since 2010 we've seen it in a very broad spectrum, especially since there's been, I think, £175 million cut from policing, 2,000 less officers. So the resources are minimal, yet we're expecting our capacity in terms of strength and manpower to be still sustained at the same level, which is difficult, as you just said, to do. So given these issues around funding and governments looking at things like the Early Intervention Fund that's been made available, and some others, we've got Troubled Families agendas around these kind of issues, and someone given 22 million over a 2-year period, or 1.5 million for the anti-knife crime kind of fund. Do you really think that this is the way forward? And they're looking at training frontline professionals, are giving extra £300,000 to train professionals working in kind of sectors. But given that we're getting cuts, and given funding is been taken from one place and allocated to another based on probably the severity or the impact it's having, Do you think some of the funding is enough to tackle this epidemic of knife crime?
I think there is a problem here, and the problem is basically straightforward. What is it that you spend in crime prevention, and what is it that you spend in dealing with the crime itself? And I think the balance is wrong. We spend billions of pounds in our penal institutions in this country, courts, police, prisons, probation, etc. But we spend a fraction of that money in terms of crime prevention. How do we revert that particular balance in a way that we deal much more with crime prevention rather than dealing with the crime itself? And I think if you look at it, what is happening over a period of time, the society is moving much faster now because of the access it has to internet, the 24/7 news that is available to people. People are much more aware of what's going on. And we have never been able to stop in terms of talking about good practices, which I talked earlier on, about trying to create the type of situation where young people have better activities in which they get involved. How do we bring those particular activities together? Some of the worst thing that happens, these crimes are very much in the inner city areas of our big conurbations in this country. And if you look at it, the service provision in inner city area is probably the worst that you ever find. These are literally what are commonly called the ghettos type of situation within which our young people are growing up. And I think we need to ensure that every particular level we spend more money, more resources, more responsibility. See, parents often think we can do only think what happens in our family. You got to go beyond that. You can't then sit around and say, when I go to school, it's a matter for the teachers. Teachers can play a certain role in this particular matter. Youth workers and others can play some other part during the time of leisure activity. Police and others can play a very important part in patrolling these particular areas and bringing to their attention the seriousness of the matter. And the community as a whole to give that particular support. It's not my problem, it's not your problem, it's all together, put together, it's our problem. And we need to deal with in a manner in which there are positive outcomes of what we're trying to deal with.
Yeah, there's as you alluded to there's wider implications in terms of safeguarding, risk and prevention, and a lot of these reviews and policies that tend to come out post a particular incident or event tend to detail and talk around a lot more prevention, a lot more services, a lot more people to be trained, become aware. We have more little adverts in DVD formats or other formats shown on TV and screens and schools, etc. But there was a BBC report on something called scoreboards, which you're probably aware about how young people are keeping scores on the people they kill. Now that tells us then the severity of the problem we have in the UK that now is impacting some of the communities and the conditions that we mentioned that are probably ripe for people with knife crime or even gang culture to form. It looks like we're experiencing something new in terms of a new style, a new form of attraction to join groups or which then creates a sense of power or pride. Or even a form of initiation, because if we got something like scoreboards and they're saying to whoever kills or the most people goes up on a scoreboard, a bit like you see in these game show hosts, there's sense of reward and power and prestige involved in all that. Do you think then we are learning something that, as you already alluded to earlier, something that is, say, from abroad? Because you see a lot of this happening in Mexico and other cities where to come to initiation in the groups that they are, and we've seen it in Latino groups and Hispanic groups, especially in the documentaries. Are we then looking at that being replicated where if a young person wants to become involved of a group that is creating a sense of power, fear, and generating a sense of fear in community, to the point where part of the initiation is to kill someone? Is that disturbing, or are we, as we said, not learning the lessons whereby we are looking to narrow in one particular area?
I think it's not only disturbing, it's unacceptable. And the reason why I give you an analogy which is very interesting, in the last few years I've been in Parliament, I've seen the government introducing what in those days we used to call the antisocial behavior order. In other words, if you misbehave in a particular place, you will be brought before the court and you will be charged for that antisocial behavior and the condition placed on you at that time. What I'm saying is that many of young people growing up in this area where they don't see any hope of their own development, of their own particular contribution they could make, these youngsters, during the time of antisocial behavior order, I found that they were making it a very proud thing to have an antisocial behavior order, because it was a medal of honor for them, saying, look, I've got this ESBO given to me because of what I've done wrong. So they used that very much as the enhancement of their particular status among the gang culture. The same thing happens in relation to the score that people came about who they've knifed or who they've killed, etc. To my mind, all these things doesn't necessarily need a new law or a new approach to dealing with the situation. Is to look within the structure of the family. Where are my children going around this afternoon? What is happening to the people who sell knives, etc., young people? What is happening in relation to the leisure activity that we keep talking about? What is happening in relation to the health of an individual, whether he is capable enough of understanding. I mean, I have a number of legislative measures in Parliament which I am promoting. I want to raise the age of criminal responsibility from 10 to 12. I want to establish fundamental practices on the rehabilitation of offenders. How do we rehabilitate people? See, 60 to 70% of people who come out of prison, particularly young people, offend within 2 years. So what's happening to prison? Are we locking them up and creating a university of crime for these particular young people? Or are we providing them rehabilitative practices which will move them away from the crime structure? And there are many people who are now working in youth service who have been involved in sort of gang cultures. They have seen the stupidity of that particular approach. They're now acting as agents to bring changes among young people, and that's a good sign. How do we encompass those particular people within the structure, social structures of our country, use their expertise? It's no good bringing people from outside who don't understand the community living in a particular area. It's the community workers, community people, youth workers, etc., who are in these particular areas, who should take over the responsibility and move forward in that particular direction.
Yeah, as you've just again alluded to, some of the structures and families and other things that are probably kind of creating openings or breaking down and not providing that sense of stability for that child, that young person. It sounds as though then that there are sort of underpinning other issues, such as possible mental health condition involved with someone who is forced to join a group and unable to sort of rationally or logically work things out for themselves, and that creates a sense of vulnerability. There's issues about what about a young person from a broken home or you know, single parent home, and all these factors, absent fathers and domestic. These are all probably catalyst for some, or probably an avenue for some, that whereby they are used, these arguments are used against them. But look, nobody cares for you and no one loves you, and then our services are expected to look more into these issues given they're talking about training frontline staff to prevent issues of knife crime, violent crime and other aspects of certain negative behaviours and probably gangs, to the point where if we address these areas where that possibly, as we say, broken, and sort of heal them and bring them back together, we can create that sense of a protective, more like a protective factor. So that individual, that young person growing up, has a more strong sense of stability in being able to deter away the potential or the prospect of becoming involved in such types of negative behaviour.
See, there is no such thing as either or. It's a question of accumulation of a number of good practices that we got to use. The family structure, what happens within a family structure? Is it a single parent family where the supervision of the youngsters is lacking over there? Is it that the schooling part of it, where there's an underachievement by their particular youngsters not being able to sort of compete with their counterparts, etc.? Is there a problem over there? What I've always said, don't throw that problem to somebody else. Look at yourself, where are the deficiencies within your own particular structure of what you could do. And I always believed that when you effectively, for example, find that there is a particular deficiency in a family structure, how do you create what I commonly call mentoring programs, within which community people can look at our youngsters and say, that is a wrong thing to do. It's the easiest thing to do, to be able to say to people what is right and what is wrong. How do we bring that particular approach for people to ask their fundamental question before they embark on a path which will ruin their particular career and life for the rest of the time they are in this country? And I think it's effectively ways and means where good practices could be employed. Why is it that the knife crime rate in Scotland drops so substantially? How do people effectively in certain parts of Latin America have looked at the issue of drugs? They no longer look at drugs as a crime pattern. They look very much as a health problem. What is it one needs to do in terms of the health of that individual and the use of drugs, etc. This is happening in Portugal, this is happening in Mexico, Colombia, and a number of other countries. And I think we've got to be much more open with ourselves, that if things are available in the society, we can't turn our blind eye and say that is unacceptable. That won't get you anywhere. You can have as many committees and reports as you like. They will be on your shelf gathering dust until the next time trouble happens and you start all over again. That is not the way to run a country. Yeah, and
having said that, and for the viewers at home and who've got parents and kids, and I don't know that'll be watching this, from a local and international kind of audience. As we see now, carrying a knife is somewhat normalized behavior for young people, give and take, for what reasons they try to justify, for protection purposes, for, as we just talked about, to sense to get control of some form of territory somewhere, for whatever reason. But then, for those watching, and even whoever's professionals watching this program or whoever, how do you think young people can play a role in probably reducing this issue of knife crime? And we're talking about professionals playing a role in services, but see if we can put it into the lap of young people who may be watching. How do you think for those young people watching, they can play a part in reducing some of these issues around this knife crime and kind of violent behaviour?
Yes, I think there is need for a much more open discussion within the family structure of why we do certain things in the way we do it. And I think it's perfectly possible for parents to sit with their children rather than turning the telly on and just looking at the Coronation Street or programs like that, to be able to have communication with your own children, to be able to instill upon them the seriousness of what we are involved in. And I think it's perfectly easy to do. For teachers to devote certain of their particular time to be able to bring as part of the curriculum development as to the seriousness of the criminal process in this particular country and how it impacts on their lives for the rest of the time they are here. And I think effectively creating the type of programs of that particular nature, within there is more and more involvement of young people. And remember, we are talking of articulate young people. They're not daft. They're not the people who've got no brains, etc. They understand what they're doing. It's a question of saying what they're doing is wrong. You're taking somebody's life, and the seriousness of that particular matter means that you may find yourself behind bars for years to come, and you have used one of the most developing time of your career in a prison situation. That is not going to help you.
Exactly, and it also seems as though, given we've heard governments talk before of zero tolerance approach to some certain behaviours, antisocial behaviour, criminal justice behaviour, and also the message that we're giving out today with this particular programme is we remember lessons learned. For example, when we had the 2011 riots, I think David Cameron called over Bill Braxton from the Los Angeles, who dealt with the riots, to bring in a more law enforcement approach to control behaviour that was just literally spiralling out of control. So then, is that leading to us, because of the time we got left for the show, is that leading us to as you mentioned, even legislation, a more law enforcement becoming the only option potentially available, though you have alluded to early prevention, other strategies in families and homes? Give and take, for example, the Police and Crime Act 2009 allowed authorities of police to use injunctions to disperse or deal with gang-related violence. So are we saying we're moving towards that style where law enforcement seems to become an only option for certain people to address this particular issue from a more kind of a policing kind of perspective?
I think there's a danger simply to rely on law as a means of solving community problems. Let me tell you what I mean by that. It's very, very easy to say, let's have a law against certain things. But when you have a law, the courts have to implement that particular law. And if you have to implement that law, that effectively means there'll be a sentence at the end of it. And that takes away your liberty, your life, and your development in the way you are being brought in the criminal justice system. I've always said one of the crucial way to look at it, law can be one of the method by which you can bring the seriousness of the issue to the attention of young people. But you've got to go slightly beyond that one. You've got to ask yourself the very fundamental question, does law actually at the end of the day will reduce this particular crime? My answer is it doesn't necessarily happen so. I mean, when you just take this country, we have so many laws almost every year being introduced by Parliament, and yet we've got 86,000 people in British prison institutions in this country. It hasn't reduced our population. More the prisons you build, more the law you establish, more the people will end up in prisons. My suggestion has been, look very carefully. Sentencing must be the last option where you take the liberty of an individual. If it's a very vile, serious crimes, that should not stop you from using that law. But there are a number of in-between situations. Before the young people get entangled into this sort of situation, what are the ways and means we have preventive strategy on the basis of these youngsters can play a useful part in the community?
Thank you for that kind of conclusion, and also you seem to have summarized which way we go forward. And as we are coming towards the conclusion of today's program, we have heard and how it's been carefully crafted in this interview from Lord Dholakia and ways forward and possible ways whereby we all can play a part in reducing this current challenge, epidemic problem, issue around knife crime. And there's a lot more that can be done. Funding may be one thing, but in terms of services, parents and power, there's a lot that we can do to potentially monitor and manage a situation that is currently really affecting all communities, loved ones, and people's lives have been lost, young people living in fear, communities and families living in fear. But I really appreciate and thank you very much for your contributions, Lord Dholakia.
Thank you for questioning so toughly about these particular matters. And I very much hope that there will be some impact on our young people, because he's somebody's child, he's somebody's brother, he's somebody's sister. And I think all of us have a responsibility to ensure that we give them a better future, how to lead their particular life in the United Kingdom.
Once again, thank you very much for coming on to the Insight Show. And thank you for the viewers. If there's any more questions or any other issue that you would like to raise and discuss, feel free to call the Akaal Channel or the Insight Show or to myself, Jaswan Bora. And we look forward again for another interesting topic and issue on the next show of the Insight Show. Thank you for watching.
ਅਕਾਲ ਚੈਨਲ ਨੂੰ ਸਬਸਕ੍ਰਾਈਬ ਕਰੋ। ਨਵੀਂ ਵੀਡੀਓਜ਼ ਦੀ ਨੋਟੀਫਿਕੇਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਲਈ ਬੈਲ ਆਈਕਨ ਨੂੰ ਕਲਿੱਕ ਕਰਨਾ ਨਾ ਭੁੱਲਣਾ।